Sometimes the most unexpected days turn your world upside down. This isn't just another story. It's about how a simple property dispute turned into a battle that would change everything. But before I tell you what happened, make sure to hit that subscribe button and notification bell, because trust me, you'll want to see how this ends. It was one of those perfect spring mornings in our quiet suburban neighborhood. The kind where the air feels crisp and you can hear birds chirping as the sun peeks through the trees. I remember checking my email that morning, sipping coffee on my back porch, watching the sunlight dance across the surface of my backyard pond. That pond was my pride and joy. I'd spent 3 years transforming what used to be a muddy depression in the ground into a thriving ecosystem. Koi fish glided beneath lily pads, frogs croaked from the carefully placed rocks, and local birds had made it their favorite stopover. It wasn't just a pond, it was a sanctuary I'd built with my own hands. Nathan here, and I've lived in Maple Grove Estates for 7 years. Never had any issues with the Homeowners Association, always kept my lawn trimmed, my hedges neat, and my holiday decorations within regulation. I was that neighbor who'd wave hello, help collect your mail when you're away, and keep to himself otherwise. But everything changed when Victoria Marshall became the new HOA president. She wasn't like our previous president, who understood the balance between maintaining property values and respecting homeowners' rights. No, Victoria had different ideas about how things should be run. I first noticed her during my morning routine, standing at the edge of my property, tablet in hand, taking pictures of my pond. Something about her posture, the way she stood, with her chin lifted slightly, designer sunglasses perched on her nose, sent a chill down my spine. Oliver, my next-door neighbor for the past 5 years, was watering his plants when he caught my eye. He gave me that look, the one that said, "Heads up, something's brewing." Oliver had dealt with Victoria before, when she'd tried to force him to remove his children's treehouse, claiming it violated some obscure height restriction. I could have ignored her that morning, could have just gone inside and carried on with my day. But something told me to walk over and introduce myself, even though every instinct warned me this wasn't going to be a friendly neighborhood chat. "Good morning," I called out, trying to keep my voice light and friendly. "I'm Nathan, this is my property. Can I help you with something?" Victoria lowered her tablet slowly, turning to face me with what I can only describe as a practiced smile. "Oh, Nathan, perfect timing. I was just documenting the community amenities for our new digital catalog." "Community amenities?" I felt my stomach drop. "This is my private pond. I built it myself." Her smile didn't waver, but her eyes narrowed slightly behind those designer frames. "Actually, according to the original development plans, this area was meant to be a community water feature. We're simply reclaiming it for its intended purpose." In that moment, standing there in my own backyard, watching this stranger claim ownership of something I'd poured my heart into, I realized my peaceful morning routine had just been shattered. But what Victoria didn't know was that I had something she didn't expect, something that would turn this whole situation on its head. Victoria's presence in our neighborhood became impossible to ignore over the next few days. She moved through Maple Grove Estates like she owned every inch of it, clipboard perpetually in hand, that tablet ready to document any perceived violation. The whispers started almost immediately, how she'd forced the Williams family to repaint their entire house because the shade of blue was non-conforming, or how she'd threatened the elderly Mr. Peterson with daily fines until he removed his beloved rose garden, claiming it violated some obscure landscaping ordinance. I watched her from my kitchen window that Wednesday morning, the steam from my coffee cup fogging the glass as she conducted what she called a property assessment of my backyard. She wasn't alone this time. 2 other HOA board members flanked her like loyal lieutenants, nodding at everything she said while she gestured animatedly toward my pond. The sunlight caught her perfectly manicured nails as she pointed out various features. The natural stone border I'd spent weeks selecting and placing, the custom filtration system hidden beneath carefully arranged plants. Oliver appeared at his fence line, pretending to trim his hedges while keeping an eye on the situation. He texted me earlier, warning that Victoria had been making rounds, showing up at people's doors with compliance notices and community improvement proposals. But nothing could have prepared me for what happened next. The doorbell rang just as I was setting down my coffee cup. Through the frosted glass panels beside my front door, I could make out 3 silhouettes. Taking a deep breath, I opened the door to find Victoria standing there, flanked by her associates. Udna, a tall man in an expensive suit who introduced himself as Gregory from the legal committee, and a woman named Patricia who apparently handled community relations. Nathan, Victoria's voice dripped with artificial sweetness, we need to discuss the water feature in your backyard. She held up a thick folder stamped with the HOA logo. We've been reviewing the original development plans from when Maple Grove Estates was first built. Your pond, it's sitting on what was designated as a community drainage area. We'll need to make some changes. I felt my jaw tighten, but kept my voice steady. That drainage area was a muddy pit when I bought this house. I have all the permits and approvals from the city for the pond construction. The previous HOA board signed off on everything. Victoria's smile didn't waver, but her eyes hardened. Ah, yes, the previous board. They were rather lax in their interpretation of the covenants. We're working to correct those oversights. Gregory, would you explain the situation to Nathan? The lawyer stepped forward, opening a leather portfolio. According to Section 7, subsection C of the original community plans, all water features and drainage areas are considered common property. The previous board may have approved your modifications, but they didn't have the authority to redesignate common areas as private property. I felt a chill run down my spine, despite the warm spring air. I have documentation proving this is my property. I've invested thousands of dollars in this pond. You can't just claim it now. Patricia stepped forward, her voice honey-sweet but her eyes cold. We're not claiming anything, Nathan. We're simply restoring proper order. The HOA is willing to be reasonable about this. We'll allow you to maintain primary maintenance responsibility for the pond, but it needs to be accessible to all community members. We're thinking a nice pathway around the perimeter, maybe some benches. The image of strangers traipsing through my backyard, sitting around my pond, disturbing the delicate ecosystem I'd spent years cultivating, made my blood boil. But I kept my composure, years of corporate negotiations coming in handy. I'll need to review this with my own attorney, I said, reaching for the folder Victoria held. I assume you have copies of all the original development plans and the specific covenant sections you're citing? Something flickered across Victoria's face, surprise, concern, before her professional mask slipped back into place. Of course. Gregory has prepared a complete package. We'll need your response within 7 days. After that, we'll have to move forward with implementing the community access plan. As they turned to leave, Victoria paused, glancing back over her shoulder. Oh, and Nathan, we noticed your garden shed is 6 inches taller than regulation height. You might want to address that too. We'd hate to have to start issuing fines. I watched them walk away, their shoes clicking precisely against the concrete, Victoria's designer outfit catching the morning sun. Through my peripheral vision, I saw Oliver disappear back into his house, phone already pressed to his ear. The neighborhood grapevine would be buzzing within hours. Inside, I spread the documents across my dining room table, my coffee long forgotten. The folder contained survey maps, original development plans, covenant documents, and a thick stack of proposed modifications for my property. But something wasn't adding up. The survey maps looked odd, like they'd been altered. The date stamps didn't match the original development timeline I remembered from my home purchase. I pulled out my own files, carefully preserved from when I'd bought the house and constructed the pond. As I laid them side by side with Victoria's documents, my suspicion grew. The property lines were different. The designation of common areas had shifted, but most importantly, there was a glaring discrepancy in the dates. Jack, a retired civil engineer who lived 3 doors down, had helped me with the original pond design. I needed his eyes on this. Grabbing my phone, I texted him a photo of the documents. His response came back almost immediately. "Those aren't the original plans. Meet me at Lucy's coffee shop in 20 minutes. Lucy's was just outside our subdivision, a cozy little cafe where neighbors often gathered to exchange gossip away from prying eyes. Jack was already there when I arrived, a stack of yellowed papers spread out on the table before him. "I knew this would come in handy someday," he said, tapping the papers. "I kept copies of all the original development plans when I served on the Architectural Review Board 15 years ago."
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
"What Victoria showed you, those have been modified." My heart raced as Jack pointed out the discrepancies. Subtle changes in property lines, altered dates, modified designations. "The original plans clearly show that area as private property," he explained. "It was never designated as a community drainage area. Someone's gone to a lot of trouble to alter these documents." "But why?" I asked, though I was beginning to piece it together. "Why target my pond specifically?" Jack leaned back, his expression grim. "Have you seen the new community improvement proposals? Victoria's been pushing for a series of water features throughout the neighborhood, fountains, reflecting pools, that sort of thing. But the HOA budget can't cover new construction. An existing pond, though? One that's already maintained and paid for? That would be quite a convenient solution." The pieces were falling into place. Victoria wasn't just being difficult. This was a calculated move. She needed a showcase piece for her grand community improvement plans, and my pond was her target. But she'd made a crucial mistake. She didn't know about my background in property law, or my friendship with Jack, or the meticulous records I kept of every permit, approval, and modification. As I drove home, my mind was already formulating a plan. Victoria thought she had me cornered, but she'd underestimated her opponent. I'd spent years documenting everything about my property, photographing every stage of the pond's construction, keeping copies of every interaction with the previous HOA board. I had emails, permits, approvals, a paper trail that would be impossible to dispute. Pulling into my driveway, I noticed Victoria's car crawling past my house, her face illuminated by her tablet screen as she presumably documented more violations. Our eyes met briefly, and she gave me that same practiced smile, but this time I smiled back because I knew something she didn't. The real battle was just beginning, and I had an ace up my sleeve that would wipe that smug look off her face permanently. The morning sun cast long shadows across my dining room table, now covered with stacks of documents, photographs, and official permits. I hadn't slept much, spending most of the night organizing evidence and building my case. My coffee had gone, cold, forgotten, amid the rush of preparation for what I knew would be a pivotal confrontation. A text from Oliver lit up my phone screen. "Emergency HOA meeting, called for 10 a.m. V sent notice to all residents. Something about community improvement. Initiatives." My stomach tightened. Victoria was moving faster than expected, trying to push through her agenda before I could mount a proper defense. The community center buzzed with tension when I arrived. Neighbors filled the rows of chairs, their whispered conversations creating a nervous hum throughout the room. Jack sat near the back, giving me a subtle nod as I entered. Lucy, who'd been helping gather information from other residents, slipped me a folded note containing a list of other homeowners who'd faced similar threats from Victoria. Victoria stood at the podium, perfectly poised in a tailored blazer, her tablet propped up like a shield. Gregory and Patricia flanked her once again, their presence a clear attempt at intimidation. The projector screen behind them displayed architectural renderings of what looked like an elaborate community park, centered around what was unmistakably my pond. "As your HOA president," Victoria began, her voice carrying that familiar artificial warmth, "it's my duty to ensure our community reaches its full potential. Today, we're discussing an exciting new initiative that will enhance property values and create beautiful communal spaces for all residents to enjoy." The renderings clicked by, walking paths, benches, decorative lighting, all surrounding my pond. My blood began to boil as I watched years of my hard work being co-opted into Victoria's grandiose vision. But I remained silent, waiting for the right moment. Our first phase focuses on reclaiming and renovating an existing water feature. Victoria continued, pulling up a photo of my pond. As per original development plans, this area was always intended to be community property. We're simply restoring it to its rightful purpose. A murmur rippled through the crowd. I felt neighbors' eyes turning toward me, some sympathetic, others curious about how I'd respond. Victoria was playing to her audience masterfully, painting herself as a visionary leader while casting me as an obstacle to community progress. The renovation will include public access paths, seating areas, and enhanced landscaping. She gestured to more renderings, all funded through our existing maintenance budget, thanks to the foundation already in place. My hand rose slowly but deliberately into the air. Victoria's eyes narrowed slightly, but she couldn't ignore me without revealing her bias to the assembled residents. "Yes, Nathan? You have a question about the improvement plan?" I stood, my voice calm and measured. "Actually, I have some information to share with everyone." I moved toward the front of the room, my own folder tucked under my arm. "Before we discuss improvements to my pond, I think the community should see the actual original development plans." Victoria's practiced smile flickered. "We've already reviewed the original plans. They clearly show..." "Do they?" I pulled out Jack's preserved documents, holding them up for all to see. "Because I have the authentic plans right here, certified by the county and dated 15 years ago. They tell a very different story about property designations." Gregory stepped forward, attempting to intervene. "The HOA has already established..." "The HOA," I interrupted firmly, "has been presented with altered documents." A gasp rippled through the room. I turned to address my neighbors directly. "The plans you were shown have been modified. I can prove it." I pulled out my laptop, connecting it to the projector. Side by side, the differences between the authentic plans and Victoria's versions became glaringly obvious. Jack stood up, lending his expertise as a retired civil engineer to point out the discrepancies in technical detail. Victoria's composure cracked slightly, her knuckles whitening around her tablet. "These accusations are completely unfounded. As HOA president, I cut in, you have a fiduciary duty to this community. Presenting falsified documents violates that duty." I laid out more evidence: my original property deed, construction permits, approval letters from the previous board, and documented correspondence about the pond's private status. The room erupted in whispers. Patricia tried to call for order, but the momentum had shifted. Other homeowners began standing up, sharing their own stories of Victoria's suspicious document requests and arbitrary rule enforcement. "This isn't just about my pond," I continued, my voice rising with controlled intensity. "This is about protecting all of our properties from unauthorized seizure and manipulation. How many other documents have been altered? How many other properties are at risk? Lucy raised her hand, her voice clear and firm. The garden club has similar concerns. Our community garden plots were recently reclassified as temporary use areas without any documentation or vote. More voices joined in, more stories emerged. Victoria's face had lost its artificial warmth, replaced by barely contained fury. She tapped frantically at her tablet, perhaps searching for a way to regain control of the narrative, but the damage was done. I move for an immediate audit of all HOA documents, Jack announced, standing again, and a suspension of all new community improvement initiatives until the audit is complete. I second that motion, called another resident, followed by a chorus of agreement. Victoria slammed her tablet down on the podium. This meeting was called to discuss community improvements, not to entertain baseless accusations. As president, interrupted a senior board member who had been quietly observing, you serve at the pleasure of this community. I believe we need an emergency board meeting to address these serious allegations. The room crackled with tension as Victoria realized her carefully constructed plan was unraveling. Her eyes locked with mine, no longer hiding behind false pleasantries. In that moment, I saw something dangerous in her expression. This wasn't over. Meeting adjourned, she snapped, gathering her materials with sharp, angry movements. Gregory and Patricia huddled around her, speaking in urgent whispers as they made their way to the exit. Neighbors clustered around me, examining the documents, sharing their own stories, offering support. Oliver clapped me on the shoulder, grinning. That was quite a show, he murmured. But watch your back. Victoria doesn't take defeat well. He was right. As I packed up my evidence, I caught sight of Victoria in the parking lot through the window. She stood by her car, phone pressed to her ear, gesturing animatedly. The sun glinted off her tablet screen as she jabbed her finger at it repeatedly, and I had a sinking feeling she was already formulating her next move. I'd won this round, exposed her manipulation to the community, but something told me Victoria wasn't done fighting. This was just the beginning of a bigger battle, and I needed to be prepared for whatever she planned next. As I walked to my car, I could feel her eyes boring into my back from across the parking lot. The war for my pond, and perhaps the soul, of our community was far from over. The sound of construction equipment jolted me awake at precisely 6 a.m. The heavy rumble of machinery vibrated through my house, rattling windows and picture frames. Rushing to my backyard, I froze at the sight before me. 3 large construction vehicles lined the street behind my property, their yellow paint gleaming in the early morning light. A team of workers in reflective vests were setting up equipment along the property line adjacent to my pond. My phone buzzed with messages from neighbors. Oliver had already sent 4 texts and 2 photos of the vehicles arriving. Lucy was documenting everything from her second-story window, but it was Jack's message that made my heart skip. Emergency. Water main repair. Just got the notice. Check your email. There it was in my inbox, time-stamped 5:45 a.m., an urgent notice from the HOA about emergency repairs to a water main allegedly running directly through my property. The notice cited immediate safety concerns and claimed authority for emergency access under Section 12 of the community bylaws. I grabbed my robe and rushed outside, where Victoria stood reviewing documents with the construction foreman. Her designer workout clothes suggested she'd been waiting for this moment, ready to oversee her latest power play personally. What's the meaning of this? I demanded, approaching the group. There's no water main here. I had full utility surveys done before installing the pond. Victoria's smile was razor sharp. The surveys must have missed it. We discovered the issue during our recent infrastructure review. As HOA president, I have a duty to address urgent safety concerns immediately. The foreman looked uncertain, glancing between us. Ma'am, if there's a dispute about the location, there's no dispute. Victoria cut him off. "We have proper authorization and documentation. Proceed as planned." I pulled out my phone, quickly dialing the city utilities department. Victoria's expression flickered as I put the call on speaker. "Yes, I need to verify the location of water mains on my property. There's a crew here claiming emergency repairs are needed." The utilities department representative sounded confused. "Sir, we don't have any scheduled repairs in your area. All water mains in Maple Grove Estates run along the main roads, not through residential lots." Victoria's face tightened as nearby workers paused, listening. "There must be some confusion," she interjected loudly. "Our HOA records clearly show—" "Your HOA records are wrong," I stated firmly, ending the call. "Just like the altered development plans you tried to use last week. Foreman, I suggest you contact your supervisor. Operating without proper utility authorization could put your company in serious liability." The foreman signaled his crew to stand down, already pulling out his own phone. Victoria's carefully constructed plan was unraveling for the second. Time in a week, but instead of retreating, she changed tactics. "Nathan," she said, stepping closer, her voice dropping to a near whisper, "you're making this much harder than it needs to be. The community improvement project is happening. One way or another, fight it. And you might find yourself dealing with a lot more than just water main repairs." Looking into her eyes, I saw no trace of the polished HOA president, only cold determination and something darker, almost predatory. She held my gaze for a moment longer before turning sharply on her heel, already tapping on her tablet as she walked away. The construction crew packed up within the hour, but Victoria's threat lingered like a storm cloud. I spent the morning documenting everything, photographing the disturbed soil where they'd started working, saving the fraudulent water main notice, recording statements from neighbors who'd witnessed the scene. Lucy brought coffee and her famous homemade muffins, setting up an impromptu strategy session at my kitchen table. "She's getting desperate," Lucy observed, spreading out copies of HOA regulations, using utility repairs as a cover to access. "Your property? That's crossing a serious legal line." Jack arrived shortly after, his expertise as a retired civil engineer proving invaluable once again. "The property line markers they placed are wrong," he noted, comparing them to official surveys. "They're off by nearly 3 feet, trying to create a utility easement that doesn't exist." Oliver kept watch from his yard, texting updates about Victoria's movements through the neighborhood. She'd been going door to door, likely trying to control the narrative before word of her failed operation spread too far. By afternoon, my security cameras caught her making another pass by my house, this time accompanied by a different contractor. They stood at the edge of my property, Victoria pointing animatedly at various spots around the pond. The contractor took measurements and photos, nodding as Victoria spoke. My phone rang, Rebecca from the city planning office returning my call from earlier. "Nathan, I reviewed those documents you sent over. The HOA has no authority to conduct utility work without city approval. More importantly, we have no record of any water main or utility easement on your property. Can you send that in writing?" I asked, already formulating my next move. "Already done. Check your email. And Nathan, you might want to contact the county recorder's office. Someone tried to file an easement modification for your property last week. It was rejected for inappropriate documentation, but you should know they tried." The pieces of Victoria's plan were becoming clear. The false water main emergency was just another attempt to gain access to my property, likely to begin work on her community improvement project without proper authorization. When that failed, she tried to create a utility easement through backdoor channels. As evening approached, I noticed increased activity at Victoria's house. Cars came and went, Gregory's sleek BMW, Patricia's red SUV, and several vehicles I didn't recognize. They were planning something, probably their next attempt to seize control of my property. I sat at my desk, reviewing security footage from the morning's events, when movement near the pond caught my eye. Two figures in dark clothing were placing something along the water's edge, working quickly in the growing darkness. I rushed outside, flipping on the floodlights, but they were already gone. In their place, they'd left survey stakes and orange marking paint, outlining what appeared to be a construction zone that encompassed most of my backyard. My phone buzzed with a new HOA email notification. Subject line, Notice of Emergency. Meeting tomorrow, 8 a.m. The message cited urgent safety concerns and the need for immediate action regarding unauthorized water features in the community. Victoria was calling for another showdown, but this time I'd be ready. I spent the next few hours preparing documents, making calls, and setting up my own surprise for tomorrow's meeting. If Victoria wanted to play hardball, she was about to. Learn that she wasn't the only one who could change the game. As I finally headed to bed, my security system pinged with another motion alert. Victoria's car was making another slow pass by my house, her silhouette visible behind the wheel. But this time, I smiled. Because tomorrow would bring something she wasn't expecting. Something that would turn her own tactics against her in a way she'd never see coming. The emergency meeting room felt different at 8 a.m. Tension hung thick in the air as residents filed in, many clutching coffee cups and wearing expressions of confusion or concern. I'd arrived early, setting up my laptop and documents at a corner table, watching as Victoria orchestrated her grand entrance with practiced precision. She swept into the room exactly 2 minutes before the scheduled start, flanked not only by Gregory and Patricia, but also by a new face. A stern-looking man in an expensive suit who carried himself with the unmistakable authority of a senior attorney. Victoria's expression betrayed a hint of smugness as she caught my eye, clearly believing her new legal muscle would give her the upper hand. The meeting began with Victoria's usual flourish of artificial concern for community welfare. We've discovered serious safety violations regarding unauthorized water features, she announced, her voice carrying that familiar note of manufactured urgency. Our insurance auditors have flagged multiple liability issues that require immediate action. The new attorney stepped forward, introducing himself as Harrison Wells from a prestigious law firm. After reviewing the situation, he began, his voice carrying the weight of authority. We've determined that certain residential water features pose an unacceptable risk to community safety. The HOA board has a fiduciary duty to address these hazards immediately. I watched as he displayed a series of photos on the projector screen, all of my pond, taken from various angles, with red circles highlighting supposed danger areas. The photos had clearly been manipulated to make the pond appear unkempt and hazardous, shadows darkened and colors muted to create an impression of murky danger. Victoria smiled thinly as worried murmurs spread through the room. Given these serious safety concerns, the board proposes immediate remediation. All private water features must either be filled in or transferred to HOA control for proper maintenance and safety upgrades. That was my cue. I stood slowly, but before I could speak, the door at the back of the room opened. A woman in a crisp business suit entered, followed by two men carrying briefcases. Victoria's expression froze as she recognized the woman, Margaret Chen, lead investigator from the State Housing Authority. I apologize for interrupting, Margaret announced, her voice clear and professional, but I believe this meeting directly relates to our ongoing investigation. Please continue. We'll observe for now. Victoria's composure slipped for just a moment before she recovered, but the damage was done. The room had shifted, residents turning to whisper to each other as the state investigators took seats at the back, notepads ready. I cleared my throat. Before we discuss safety concerns, I'd like to address some interesting Findings. I connected my laptop to the projector, bringing up a series of documents. These are the insurance audit reports for our community over the past 5 years. You'll notice there's no mention of any safety concerns regarding private water features. Harrison Wells stepped forward, attempting to interject, but I continued. More importantly, I have here the current insurance policy documents, the complete versions, not the selective excerpts presented today. They specifically list properly maintained private water features as covered amenities. Victoria's face had lost its smugness, replaced by a tightening around her eyes, as she realized I'd obtained documents she thought were safely hidden. But I wasn't finished. And here's something particularly interesting, I continued, switching to a new document. Financial records showing recent attempts to reallocate HOA funds for a series of community water features, projects that mysteriously align with the properties being targeted for these supposed safety violations. The state investigators were writing rapidly now, their presence adding weight to every revelation. Victoria tried to regain control of the room. These financial matters are confidential board business. Actually, Margaret Chen interrupted, standing under state law, HOA financial records must be made available to all members upon request. We're particularly interested in these attempted fund reallocations, as they appear to violate several state regulations regarding HOA financial management. The room erupted in chaos. Residents began shouting questions, demanding explanations. For other suspicious financial decisions they'd noticed, Gregory and Patricia edged away from Victoria, their loyalty evaporating in the face of potential legal consequences. Harrison Wells was already packing his briefcase, clearly wanting no part of what was unfolding. But Victoria wasn't done. She raised her voice above the din, her tone sharp with desperation. These accusations are completely unfounded. As HOA president... About that, Margaret interrupted again, her voice cutting through the noise. Our investigation has revealed numerous irregularities in the recent HOA board election. We'll need to review all voting records and procedural documentation. Victoria's face drained of color. The election had been her path to power, and now that too was under scrutiny. She turned to Harrison for support, but the attorney was already heading for the door, leaving her to face the music alone. I stood quietly, watching as years of Victoria's manipulation and power plays began to unravel. The state investigators moved through the room, collecting documents and taking statements from residents who suddenly felt emboldened to share their experiences of intimidation and arbitrary rule enforcement. Oliver appeared at my side, speaking low. You knew they were coming, didn't you? The state investigators. I nodded slightly. Anonymous tip about financial irregularities and voter suppression. Once they started digging, they found plenty to investigate. Victoria stood rigid at the front of the room, her tablet clutched to her chest like a shield, watching as her carefully constructed empire crumbled around her. But then something shifted in her expression, a hardening of her features, a dangerous glint in her eyes that told me this wasn't over. She pushed through the crowd, pausing as she passed me. You have no idea what you've started, she hissed, her voice low and venomous. This isn't about your pond anymore. I hope you're ready for what comes next. I watched her storm out, her heels clicking against the floor with military precision. Through the window, I saw her pull out her phone, speaking intensely to someone as she paced beside her car. Whatever she was planning, I knew it would be desperate and dangerous, a cornered predator's last attempt to maintain control. The meeting dissolved into smaller groups, residents clustering around the state investigators to share their stories. Lucy approached with fresh coffee, her expression concerned. That threat sounded serious, she murmured, nodding toward where Victoria had disappeared. It was, I agreed, taking the coffee. She's not going to go down quietly. Whatever comes next will be bigger than false safety violations and manipulated documents. As if to emphasize my point, Victoria's car roared to life in the parking lot, tires squealing as she accelerated away. She had lost this battle, but her parting words echoed in my mind. This wasn't over. It was about to escalate into something much more personal and dangerous than a simple property dispute. The first signs of trouble came at dawn. My security system pinged with multiple alerts, motion detected all around my property. Checking the cameras, I watched in disbelief as a team of workers methodically placed bright orange construction barriers along my entire property line. They moved with practiced efficiency, clearly following someone's careful instructions. My phone lit up with a text from Oliver. Environmental Protection Agency vans just pulled up, something about wetland violations. My heart sank as I looked out my front window. 3 official-looking vehicles were parked on the street, their government logos clearly visible in the morning light. A sharp knock at my door announced their presence. 2 inspectors in EPA windbreakers stood on my porch, flanked by a familiar face. Victoria's new ally, Harrison Wells, the attorney who had fled yesterday's meeting. His return with federal agents signaled a dramatic escalation in Victoria's campaign against me. Mr. Walsh, we're here to investigate reports of unauthorized modification of protected wetlands, the lead inspector announced, presenting his credentials. We have satellite imagery showing this property contained natural wetland features that were altered without proper environmental impact studies. I invited them in, maintaining a calm demeanor despite the rage building inside me. Victoria had done her homework. Environmental regulations could supersede local property rights. She'd found a way to bypass the HOA entirely and bring in federal authorities. The inspectors spread out through my backyard, taking samples and photographs while Harrison Wells observed with poorly concealed satisfaction. Through my kitchen window, I spotted Victoria watching from her parked car down the street, tablet propped on her steering wheel as she documented everything. Jack arrived unannounced, his experience as a civil engineer proving invaluable once again. "Those satellite images they're using," he muttered, reviewing the documentation. "They're dated before your house was even built. This whole wetland claim is based on historical data that's no longer relevant." I pulled out my own documentation, environmental surveys conducted before the pond's construction, permits from the county water board, even a recent environmental impact study I'd commissioned to monitor the pond's positive effect on local wildlife. The inspectors reviewed everything carefully, their expressions shifting from suspicion to confusion. A call to my environmental lawyer, Susan Martinez, added another layer of protection. "The EPA requires current evidence of wetland destruction, not historical data," she explained via speakerphone. "Furthermore, your pond actually creates a protected habitat. If anything, you've enhanced the environmental value of the property." Harrison Wells's smug expression faded as the inspectors began questioning the validity of their investigation. Victoria's car disappeared from view, but I knew she wouldn't be gone for long. This failed attack was just the beginning. By afternoon, the EPA team had concluded there were no violations. The construction barriers came down as quickly as they had appeared. But Victoria's next move was already in motion. Local news vans began arriving, drawn by an anonymous tip about environmental destruction in an upscale neighborhood. I watched as Victoria gave an impassioned interview from her perfectly manicured front lawn, playing the role of concerned citizen. "We're just worried about the environmental impact," she told the cameras, her voice trembling with manufactured emotion. "Our community has always prioritized conservation. This situation raises serious questions about private property rights versus environmental protection." The reporters turned to me next, microphones thrust forward, cameras rolling. Years of corporate experience had taught me how to handle media attention. I led them to my backyard, where the pond's crystal-clear water and thriving ecosystem told its own story. "This isn't about environmental protection," I stated calmly. "This is about a personal vendetta. My pond has become a sanctuary for local wildlife. We have documented evidence of increased biodiversity since its construction. The EPA just completed a thorough investigation and found no violations." The story quickly shifted from environmental controversy to neighborhood politics. Victoria's attempts to seize control of private property, the fraudulent documents, the state investigation into HOA practices. It all came to light as neighbors stepped forward to share their experiences. But Victoria had one more card to play. As the news vans packed up and the sun began to set, a new threat emerged. A thick manila envelope appeared in my mailbox, containing dozens of printed photos. They showed me entering and leaving my house, driving to work, meeting with neighbors, all taken over the past several weeks. A handwritten note accompanied the photos. Accidents happen when people don't know they're being watched. Oliver's security cameras had caught the envelope's delivery. A teenage boy on a bike, probably, paid to drop it off. The message was clear. Victoria had moved beyond legal channels. She was now resorting to surveillance and intimidation. I called the police, reporting the implied threat. They took the envelope for evidence, but we all knew proving Victoria's involvement would be difficult. She had been careful to maintain deniability, using proxies and keeping her own hands clean. As night fell, I sat in my home office, reviewing security footage and planning my next move. Victoria had escalated from bureaucratic manipulation to environmental accusations to outright intimidation. Each failed attempt only made her more desperate and dangerous. My phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "Your pond won't be the only thing that gets drained. Hope your career can survive what's coming." Minutes later, my work email began flooding with accusations of corporate misconduct, sent to my entire company's leadership team. Victoria had discovered where I worked and was now targeting my professional life. The attack was sophisticated, detailed enough to require investigation, vague enough to create lasting doubt. She had done her research, twisting innocent business meetings and routine transactions into suggestions of impropriety. My phone lit up with calls from concerned colleagues and a worried message from my boss. Looking out at my pond, watching the moonlight ripple across its surface, I felt a deep resolve harden within me. Victoria thought she could force me into submission through fear and intimidation. She didn't realize that each attack only strengthened my determination to expose her true nature. I began making calls, reaching out to contacts in cybersecurity and private investigation. If Victoria wanted to play dirty, she would soon learn that she wasn't the only one who could dig up uncomfortable truths. Her campaign of intimidation was about to backfire in ways she never anticipated. As midnight approached, my security system caught Victoria making another slow drive past my house. But this time, I smiled, because tomorrow would bring revelations that would shake her carefully constructed world to its foundations. The real question was, how far would she go when she realized she was about to lose everything? Sunrise brought an unexpected ally to my door. Patricia, Victoria's former right-hand woman, stood on my porch clutching a thick folder to her chest. Her usually perfect makeup couldn't quite hide her exhaustion, and her hands trembled slightly as she glanced over her shoulder. "I can't be seen here," she whispered, pushing the folder into my hands. "Victoria's lost her mind. What she's planning, it's gone too far. This is everything. Financial records, emails, meeting notes she thought she'd destroyed. There's even a private investigator's report she commissioned about you." Inside, Patricia sank into my kitchen chair while I poured her a cup of coffee. "She's called an emergency board meeting for tonight. Something about community safety requiring immediate action. But it's just a cover. She's planning to force through a series of rule changes that would give the HOA unprecedented power over private properties. The folder contained a goldmine of evidence. Victoria had been methodically building her power base for years, manipulating property records and HOA regulations to gradually increase her control. My pond wasn't her first target. It was just the most visible part of a larger scheme. A message from Lucy lit up my phone. Strange men taking photos of your house from the park. I pulled up my security cameras, watching two figures with professional cameras photographing my property from different angles. They weren't trying to be subtle anymore. Patricia's hands wrapped tightly around her coffee cup. Those would be from the Architectural Review Board. Victoria's convinced them your property violates some obscure height restrictions. She's planning to use the emergency meeting to push through immediate demolition orders. My phone buzzed again. Oliver. This time, utility company marking up the street. Something about emergency gas line work. Another of Victoria's schemes, no doubt, trying to find a new angle to access my property. Patricia nodded grimly. She's throwing everything at the wall, seeing what sticks, but there's more. She pulled out her phone, showing me emails between Victoria and several construction companies. She's already scheduled demolition equipment. Whether she gets approval or not, she's planning to move in tomorrow morning. The realization hit hard. Victoria wasn't just escalating, she was planning to bypass the entire approval process. Once the equipment started tearing up my property, the damage would be done, regardless of legality. I began making calls, first to Margaret Chen at the State Housing Authority, then to my lawyer, and finally to the police. Within an hour, pieces of a counter-strategy began falling into place. A knock at my door revealed Jack, accompanied by a drone operator he'd hired. "If they're documenting your property, we should do the same," he explained. The drone took flight, capturing high-resolution footage of my entire property, establishing a clear record of its current state. Lucy arrived next, bringing surprising news. The utility company supervisor is an old friend. Those gas line markers, completely unauthorized. Victoria forged work orders using letterhead she shouldn't have access to. My security system pinged. Again, Victoria's car pulling up to my curb. She stepped out, designer sunglasses in place, tablet in hand. But this time, instead of taking photos or making threats, she smiled and walked directly to my door. The doorbell rang. Through the security camera, I watched her straighten her jacket, plastering on her most diplomatic expression. Patricia nearly dropped her coffee cup, panic flashing across her face. "She can't know I'm here," she whispered, moving quickly toward my back door. "If she finds out I showed you those documents." I nodded, understanding the risk she'd taken. As Patricia slipped out through my backyard, I opened the front door to face Victoria. "Nathan," she purred, voice dripping with artificial warmth. "I think it's time we had a civilized conversation about resolving our differences." I let her in, curious about this sudden change in tactics. She settled onto my couch like she owned it, setting her tablet aside in what seemed to be a gesture of goodwill. "This situation has gotten out of hand," she began, her tone reasonable and measured. "Perhaps we can find a compromise that benefits everyone. The HOA is prepared to be generous. Financial compensation for your pond, plus a seat on the board. All you have to do is sign over the property rights." The offer might have seemed tempting if I hadn't seen Patricia's documents. Emails revealing Victoria's plans to immediately demolish everything once she had control, regardless of any promises made. "That's an interesting proposal," I replied carefully. "Almost as interesting as the demolition equipment you've already scheduled for tomorrow morning." Victoria's mask slipped for just a moment, surprise and anger flashing across her face before she recovered. "I'm sure I don't know what you're talking about. I'm trying to offer you a reasonable solution here." Like the reasonable solution you offered the Hendersons before forcing them to tear down their children's playground, or the one you gave Mrs. Collins before seizing her garden plot. I watched her expression darken as I referenced information from Patricia's documents. Victoria's diplomatic facade cracked entirely. She stood abruptly, all pretense of friendliness gone. You have no idea what you're dealing with. By this time tomorrow, your precious pond will be nothing but a memory, and that's just the beginning. She snatched up her tablet, fingers flying across the screen as she headed for the door. The emergency meeting is at 7. I'd attend if I were you, though it won't change anything. The board's decision is already locked in. What Victoria didn't know was that her visit had been recorded from multiple angles. My security cameras, Jack's drone hovering discreetly overhead, and the body camera I'd started wearing after the surveillance photos appeared in my mailbox. As her car pulled away, my phone lit up with a message from Margaret Chen. State investigators will be at the emergency meeting. Keep her talking. Everything was ready for tonight's showdown, but I knew Victoria well enough by now to expect one last desperate play. I spent the afternoon preparing, reviewing documents and coordinating with allies. Every few minutes, my security system would alert me to more suspicious activity. Unknown cars driving past, more utility workers taking photos, even a building inspector peering over my fence. As evening approached, the tension in our neighborhood was palpable. Residents gathered in small groups, whispering among themselves. Victoria's emergency meeting wasn't just about my pond anymore. It had become a referendum on her entire reign of control and intimidation. I watched the sun setting over my pond, its surface reflecting the golden light. Tomorrow, if Victoria had her way, this peaceful scene would be destroyed forever. But I had something she didn't expect. Evidence, allies, and a plan to expose every dark secret she thought she'd buried. The real question was, when cornered and desperate, how far would Victoria go to maintain her grip on power? As I gathered my materials for the meeting, I couldn't shake the feeling that tonight's confrontation would push her past the point of no return. The community center buzzed with nervous energy as residents filed in for the emergency meeting. Security cameras tracked every entrance, a precaution I'd arranged after Victoria's recent threats. State investigators positioned themselves strategically around the room, dressed in plain clothes but alert to every movement. Victoria's inner circle had already claimed the front row, their tablets and laptops creating a wall of screens. Gregory sat slightly apart from the others, his usual confidence replaced by visible unease. The seat where Patricia normally perched remained conspicuously empty. Right at 7, Victoria strode in, wearing a sharp business suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly mortgage payments. Her heels clicked against the floor with military precision as she made her way to the podium, Harrison Wells following close behind with an armful of documents. Due to urgent safety concerns, Victoria began without preamble, we're implementing immediate measures to protect our community. She gestured to Harrison, who began distributing thick packets to board members. These satellite surveys reveal serious structural issues requiring emergency action. I studied the images being displayed on the projector screen, immediately spotting the manipulation. The timestamps were wrong, the perspective altered to make my pond appear dangerously close to neighboring foundations. But before I could point this out, an unexpected voice spoke up. Those aren't satellite images. The room turned to see Timothy Reed, a quiet resident who rarely attended meetings, standing from his seat. I should know. I work for the satellite imaging company you claimed provided these surveys. These are digitally altered drone photos made to look like satellite imagery. Victoria's composure flickered as Timothy approached the podium, pulling up his company credentials on his phone. In fact, we've never done any surveys of this neighborhood. Someone used our company logo without authorization. Harrison Wells shifted uncomfortably, gathering his papers as if preparing to make a quick exit, but state investigators had already moved to block the doors. Victoria's fingers tightened on the podium as she tried to regain control of the situation. "The source of the images is irrelevant," she declared. "The structural threats they reveal require immediate action. I move to approve emergency demolition procedures, effective immediately." Gregory stood, his voice shaking slightly. "I have concerns about the legality of this motion. The required notice period for such actions is 30 days, not hours." Victoria's eyes narrowed at this betrayal from her usual ally. "Under Article 8 of our bylaws, the board can waive notice requirements for emergencies. All in favor?" But before anyone could vote, the back doors opened. Margaret Chen from the State Housing Authority entered, accompanied by 2 police officers and a familiar face that drew gasps from the crowd. Robert Marshall, Victoria's predecessor as HOA president. "I believe I can shed some light on Article 8, Robert announced, his voice carrying clearly through the stunned room. "Since Victoria's citing bylaws that don't legally exist." The room erupted in confusion as Robert approached the front, carrying his own set of documents. "These are the authentic HOA bylaws certified by the state. Article 8 contains nothing about emergency powers. That section was digitally added to the versions Victoria distributed after illegally removing me from office." Victoria's face had gone pale, but her voice remained sharp. "These accusations are absurd. Robert resigned for health reasons." "Actually," Margaret Chen interrupted, "Mr. Marshall has provided evidence that his resignation letter was forged, along with documentation of systematic manipulation of HOA records dating back 18 months. The police officers moved closer to the podium as Victoria's carefully constructed facade began crumbling. Her supporters in the front row were already distancing themselves, gathering their things and moving to different seats. But Victoria wasn't finished. She pulled out her tablet, fingers flying across the screen. "If we're discussing forgeries, perhaps we should examine these." The projector displayed emails appearing to show me agreeing to transfer my property to HOA control months ago. I smiled, having anticipated this move. Interesting emails, especially since I archived all my actual correspondence with the HOA. Every authentic email includes a blockchain-verified digital signature. Would you like to compare timestamps? The state investigators were taking notes while Victoria's remaining allies began quietly slipping toward the exits. Harrison Wells had already disappeared, presumably to contact his law firm and distance himself from the unfolding catastrophe. Victoria's composure finally shattered. "You have no idea what you're doing," she snarled, her public mask dissolving completely. "This community needs strong leadership, needs someone willing to maintain standards. You think your little pond is worth destroying everything I've built?" "You built it all on lies," Robert responded calmly. "The fake bylaws, the forged documents, the fraudulent financial records. Did you really think nobody would ever check?" Victoria's laugh was sharp and bitter. "Check? Nobody ever checks. Nobody cares about the details as long as they're property. The values keep rising. I did what was necessary to maintain order. Order through intimidation," I added, standing. "Through threats and manipulation. We found the private investigators' reports, Victoria, the surveillance photos, the fake utility work orders. It's all documented." She turned to face me fully, her expression almost feral. "You think this ends here? You have no idea what's coming. By tomorrow morning, the demolition crews won't be coming," Margaret Chen cut in. "We've already contacted the companies you hired. Their permits have been suspended pending investigation." Victoria's hand shook as she reached for her tablet, but a police officer stepped forward. "Mom, We need you to step away from the podium. We have some questions about these forged documents." The room watched in stunned silence as Victoria was escorted out, her designer heels no longer clicking with authority, but stumbling slightly on the polished floor. Through the windows, we could see more police cars arriving, lights flashing. In the growing darkness, as the crowd began to disperse, discussing the evening's shocking revelations in hushed voices, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. But I knew it wasn't quite over. Victoria might be facing legal consequences, but her final threat still echoed in my mind. She had been too confident about tomorrow morning. Oliver appeared at my side, his expression grave. "Security camera. It caught someone tampering with your breaker box an hour ago, and there's a strange smell coming from near your pond." I was already moving, pulling up my phone to access the home security system. Victoria had planned one final act of revenge, something set in motion before her downfall. The question was, could we stop it in time? The night was far from over, and somewhere in the darkness, Victoria's last desperate plan was already unfolding. We had won the battle, but the war's final strike was still to come. The acrid smell grew stronger as we approached my property, a chemical tang that made my throat tighten. Emergency vehicles' lights painted the street in alternating red and blue as firefighters assessed the situation. The source of the odor became clear as we rounded the corner to my backyard. Someone had dumped industrial chemicals into my pond. The once crystal water now showed an oily sheen under the emergency lights. Dead fish floated on the surface, their white bellies gleaming sadly in the darkness. The careful ecosystem I'd built over years was being destroyed in a matter of hours. "We've identified at least 3 different industrial solvents," the hazmat team leader explained, checking readings on his handheld detector. "Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing. These chemicals were chosen to cause maximum contamination without immediate visible effects." Oliver's security cameras had caught the whole thing. 2 figures in dark clothing moving efficiently in the shadows, pouring container after container into the water. Their faces were hidden, but their movements showed professional precision. Victoria had hired experts for her final act of revenge. Fire trucks created a perimeter as environmental emergency response teams arrived. The police were taking statements, but everyone knew proving Victoria's direct involvement would be nearly impossible. She'd maintained plausible deniability, using hired hands to do her dirty work. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "A pond for a life. Seems fair." The message disappeared seconds later, leaving no trace. But I knew it was from Victoria. Even in police custody, she was gloating about her revenge. Lucy arrived with coffee and determination, already making calls to environmental cleanup specialists she knew through her garden club. Jack brought his engineering expertise, working with the hazmat team to prevent the contamination from spreading to the groundwater. The night stretched on as experts assessed the damage. The news wasn't good. The chemicals were specifically chosen to sink into the sediment, ensuring long-term contamination. Simple cleanup wouldn't be enough. The entire pond would need to be drained and excavated, the soil replaced, the whole ecosystem rebuilt from scratch. Timothy Reed, the satellite imaging expert, offered his company's services to document the damage. Drone footage captured the extent of the contamination, while specialized sensors mapped the chemical spread. The evidence was damning, but proving who ordered the attack would be another matter entirely. Around midnight, Rebecca from the city planning office arrived, having been called in to assess the environmental impact. She took one look at the scene and pulled out her phone. This isn't just vandalism anymore. This is environmental terrorism. We need state and federal involvement. As if on cue, my phone lit up with another anonymous message. "Cleanup costs should bankrupt you nicely. Enjoy." Victoria's plan became clear. She knew she was going down, so she designed a revenge that would destroy both my pond and my finances. But she'd miscalculated again. The emergency meeting's revelations had already sparked investigations into her financial dealings. Patricia's documents proved Victoria had embezzled HOA funds, which meant her assets would be frozen. More importantly, the HOA's insurance would be liable for environmental damage caused by its president's actions. Dawn approached as the emergency teams continued their work. The neighborhood had gathered, offering support and sharing their own stories of Victoria's manipulation. Robert Marshall, the former HOA president, looked particularly grim as he surveyed the damage. "She did something similar when she wanted my resignation," he revealed quietly. "Not environmental damage, but she found ways to threaten everything I cared about. I stepped down to protect my family. I should have fought back then." The sun rose over a changed landscape. My beautiful pond was now surrounded by hazard tape and emergency equipment. The fish I'd raised from fingerlings floated lifeless on the contaminated water. But something unexpected was happening. The community was coming together. Neighbors brought coffee and breakfast for the emergency workers. Children made signs offering to help with the cleanup. Local environmental groups arrived with offers of support and expertise. Victoria had tried to destroy something beautiful, but she'd accidentally created something stronger, a united community. My phone rang. Margaret Chen from the State Housing Authority. "We've found something interesting in Victoria's financial records. Large payments to a chemical supply company made through a shell corporation. She got sloppy in her rush for revenge." The evidence was mounting, but Victoria had one final surprise waiting. As the morning news crews arrived to cover the environmental incident, they received an anonymous tip about my alleged corporate misconduct. Victoria had timed her smear campaign to coincide with the pond's destruction, hoping to destroy my reputation alongside my property. But this too backfired. My company's legal team had already documented Victoria's false accusations. The news. Crews found a different story, one about HOA corruption, environmental crimes, and a community fighting back against abuse of power. Oliver appeared with more security footage. Cameras had caught Victoria's hired vandals returning to a vehicle registered to one of her shell companies. The police were already moving to make additional arrests. Victoria's careful plans were unraveling faster than she could create new ones. Around mid-morning, hazmat teams finished their initial assessment. The damage was severe but not irreparable. The cleanup would take months and cost a small fortune, but the pond could eventually be restored. More importantly, the contamination hadn't reached the groundwater table thanks to the specialized liner I'd installed during construction. My phone buzzed one final time with an anonymous message. "This isn't over." But looking around at the community united in response to this crisis, I knew Victoria was wrong. Her reign of terror was ending not with her planned triumph, but with her complete isolation. Local environmental groups pledged support for the restoration. Neighbors offered to help with the cleanup and reconstruction. What Victoria intended as a devastating final blow had instead become a catalyst for positive change. The morning sun climbed higher as emergency teams began the first stages of cleanup. Victoria had tried to destroy something precious, but she'd failed to understand a fundamental truth. Some things, once broken, come back stronger. My pond would be restored, and the community would heal, while Victoria faced the consequences of her actions alone. The environmental cleanup crews worked methodically under the midday sun, their hazmat suits gleaming white against the murky water of my contaminated pond. Specialized equipment hummed as they extracted samples and tested contamination levels. The neighborhood had transformed into something resembling a disaster response zone, complete with incident command centers and mobile testing laboratories. Margaret Chen arrived with a team of forensic accountants, their laptops and tablets filled with financial records seized from Victoria's home. The web of shell companies and hidden transactions they uncovered painted a picture far darker than anyone had imagined. The chemical attack on my pond wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a pattern stretching back years. We found similar payments dating back to when she first joined the HOA board, Margaret explained, spreading documents across my kitchen table. Small at first, private investigators, document forgers, people willing to apply pressure to resistant homeowners. But the amounts grew larger, the services more dangerous. The investigation revealed Victoria's methodology. She would identify properties she wanted to control, then systematically harass and intimidate the owners until they gave in. Those who resisted faced escalating consequences: vandalism, anonymous threats, and in some cases, environmental sabotage carefully designed to force expensive repairs. Robert Marshall, the former HOA president, studied the financial records with growing horror. She used HOA funds to finance all of this. Every fine she collected, every fee she imposed, it all went into her shadow operation. The community improvement projects she proposed were just covers for moving money around. Lucy arrived with news from her environmental contacts. The chemicals she used weren't just industrial solvents, they were specifically formulated to cause long-term contamination. The company that supplied them is known for providing custom blends to clients who want to force property abandonments. The scale of Victoria's operations stunned even the investigators. She had built a sophisticated network of contractors, shell companies, and corrupt officials, all dedicated to helping her seize control of properties she coveted. My pond was just the latest target in a years-long campaign of systematic property theft. Timothy Reed's satellite imaging team discovered something even more disturbing. Historical imagery showed similar patterns of environmental damage at other properties Victoria had targeted. Small water features that mysteriously became contaminated, gardens that suddenly died, soil that inexplicably turned toxic, all followed by desperate owners selling to Victoria's shell companies at fraction of their property's value. The police investigation expanded rapidly. Victoria's phone records revealed connections to multiple cases of vandalism and property damage throughout the neighborhood. Her hired thugs had been busy, carrying out a campaign of carefully orchestrated destruction, designed to look like random incidents. Around sunset, a hazmat team member called me over to see something they'd discovered. Hidden beneath the pond's surface, they'd found a sophisticated delivery system for the contaminating chemicals. Someone had installed underwater pipes designed to slowly release toxins over time, ensuring the damage would appear gradual and natural rather than sudden and suspicious. This wasn't a rushed revenge attack, the team leader explained. This was planned weeks, maybe months in advance. The quick dumping of chemicals was just the final stage. The real damage was meant to unfold slowly, making it nearly impossible to prove deliberate contamination. Oliver's security cameras had caught more than just the final chemical dump. Reviewing weeks of footage, we found evidence of late night visitors installing the hidden pipeline piece by piece. Victoria had been patient, building her trap methodically while pretending to fight through official channels. As night fell again, the scope of the cleanup operation became clear. The contamination went deeper than initially thought, having seeped into the surrounding soil through the hidden pipe network. The restoration would require completely excavating the area, removing all contaminated soil and essentially rebuilding the pond from scratch. Rebecca from City Planning brought in environmental engineers to assess the full impact. Their preliminary reports were shocking. Victoria's chemical attack could have contaminated the local groundwater if not for the specialized liner I'd installed during the pond's construction. Her revenge plan had nearly caused an environmental disaster affecting the entire neighborhood. My phone kept buzzing with messages from concerned colleagues. Victoria's smear campaign had reached my professional circles, but the truth was spreading faster than her lies. My company's legal team had already issued statements condemning the false accusations and supporting my fight against HOA corruption. Around midnight, Margaret Chen called an emergency meeting with law enforcement and environmental officials. The evidence they'd gathered painted a picture of organized criminal activity far beyond simple HOA mismanagement. Victoria hadn't just broken local ordinances. She'd violated federal environmental laws, committed financial fraud, and engaged in organized criminal conspiracy. The neighborhood gathered in small groups, sharing stories of Victoria's reign of terror. Pattern after pattern emerged. The selective enforcement of rules, the suspicious accidents befalling those who opposed her, the steady accumulation of power through fear and manipulation. We had all been pieces in her grand scheme, too isolated to see the bigger picture until now. Jack's engineering expertise proved invaluable as we planned the restoration. He worked with environmental specialists to design a new pond system with enhanced protection against future contamination attempts. The community rallied around the project, offering support, resources, and determination to rebuild something even better than before. Local environmental groups proposed turning the restoration into a teaching opportunity. They wanted to document the cleanup process, using it to educate other communities about environmental protection and the importance of proper water feature management. Victoria's attempt to destroy my pond would ultimately help others protect their own. As the second night of cleanup operations continued under bright floodlights, I received one final anonymous message. "You've ruined everything." Victoria's world was crumbling around her, her carefully constructed empire of fear and control collapsing under the weight of evidence and community action. But looking at the teams working tirelessly to heal the damage she'd caused, I realized Victoria had actually given us an unexpected gift. Her final act of destruction had united the community, exposed long-hidden corruption, and created an opportunity for positive change. Sometimes the worst attacks bring out the best in people, turning disasters into catalysts for transformation. The stars shone down on the busy cleanup scene, their light reflecting off the hazmat suits and emergency vehicles. Victoria had tried to destroy something beautiful, but she'd accidentally created something even more precious, a community united against corruption, determined to rebuild stronger than ever. A spring breeze carried the sound of construction, equipment across my backyard as the restoration project entered its final phase. 6 months had passed since Victoria's chemical attack, and the landscape had transformed dramatically. The contaminated soil had been completely removed, replaced with clean earth, specially formulated to support aquatic life. New filtration systems gleamed in the morning sun, their advanced technology ensuring nothing like this could ever happen again. Lucy stood beside me, consulting a tablet filled with water quality readings. The environmental monitoring system we'd installed provided real-time data on every aspect of the pond's health. "These numbers are amazing," she said, scrolling through the charts. "The water's actually cleaner than it was before the attack." The restoration had become a community project, drawing support and expertise from unexpected places. Local universities sent environmental science students to study the cleanup process. Construction companies donated equipment and materials. Even distant HOA communities reached out, sharing their own stories of corruption and offering support for our rebuilding efforts. Margaret Chen arrived with news from the ongoing investigation. Victoria's trial was approaching, and the evidence continued to mount. The forensic accountants had traced her network of shell companies across 3 states, uncovering a pattern of environmental extortion stretching back nearly a decade. The federal prosecutors are calling it a criminal enterprise, Margaret explained, spreading case files across my new patio furniture. She didn't just target individual properties, she built an entire organization dedicated to forcing people out of their homes through environmental sabotage. Robert Marshall, now heading the interim HOA board, joined us with coffee and fresh perspectives. The community had undergone its own transformation, replacing Victoria's regime of fear with transparent governance and genuine cooperation. The new HOA bylaws, drafted with input from every resident, emphasized protection of private property rights and environmental stewardship. Timothy Reed's satellite imaging team had created a comprehensive record of the restoration process. The before and after images told a powerful story of destruction and renewal. Time-lapse footage showed the methodical removal of contaminated soil, the installation of new protective systems, and the gradual return of life to the water. Oliver monitored the security feeds, now upgraded with advanced environmental sensors. No suspicious activity in weeks, he reported, but we maintained vigilance. Victoria might be awaiting trial, but her network of accomplices wasn't fully dismantled. Some of her hired hands remained unidentified, shadows in the background of security footage. Around midday, Rebecca from City Planning arrived with unexpected news. The City Council had been so impressed by our community's response to the crisis that they were implementing new regulations for water feature protection. They're calling it the Nathan Protocol, she explained, handing me a draft of the ordinance. Your pond is becoming the gold standard for environmental security. Jack supervised the final installation of the enhanced filtration system. His engineering expertise, ensuring every component met the highest standards. The new setup included redundant safety measures, continuous monitoring, and rapid response protocols for any sign of contamination. Patricia, who had risked everything to expose Victoria's schemes, visited regularly to check on the progress. Her testimony had been crucial in the investigation, revealing the inner workings of Victoria's operation. The stress had taken its toll, but she found healing in helping with the restoration work. The afternoon sun highlighted the nearly completed project. Native plants lined the reinforced banks, their roots helping to stabilize the soil. Fish would be reintroduced soon, carefully selected species that would help maintain the pond's natural balance. Water lilies floated on the surface, their flowers beginning to open in the warm spring air. A group of environmental science students conducted their weekly tests, documenting the ecosystem's recovery. Their research would help other communities prevent and respond to similar attacks. Victoria's attempt to destroy my pond had inadvertently created a living laboratory for environmental protection. Local news crews arrived to document the final stages of restoration. The story had evolved from one of environmental crime to community resilience. Reporters interviewed residents about the changes in the neighborhood, the strengthened bonds between neighbors, and the lessons learned about standing up to corruption. Margaret received a call from the prosecution team. Victoria's defense was crumbling as more evidence emerged. Former associates were turning against her, revealing details of her operations in exchange for leniency. The investigation had expanded to other communities where she had operated, uncovering similar patterns of environmental sabotage and property theft. As evening approached, the construction crews packed up their equipment for the last time. The major work was complete, leaving only fine details and landscaping to finish. The pond would need time to establish its new ecosystem, but the foundations were solid, the protections robust. Rebecca brought the final inspection reports, each page filled with approvals and certifications. The restoration hadn't just met environmental standards, It had exceeded them, setting new benchmarks for water feature safety and security. The city was already incorporating our innovations into their building codes. The sunset painted the water in shades of gold and purple as neighbors gathered for an informal celebration. Tables appeared laden with food and drinks. Children played safely behind the new protective fencing, and conversations flowed as freely as the filtered water. The atmosphere was lighter than it had been in months, free from the shadow of Victoria's influence. Lucy's Garden Club had begun planning complementary landscaping around the pond, designing spaces that would support local wildlife while maintaining the enhanced security measures. The restoration had evolved into something greater than simply replacing what was lost. It was about creating a stronger, more resilient environment. A message arrived from the district attorney's office. Victoria had finally agreed to a plea deal. The terms were strict, including full restitution for environmental damage, forfeiture of assets gained through her schemes, and significant prison time. Her empire of environmental extortion was officially ending. As night fell, the new lighting system activated automatically, casting a gentle glow across the water. Security cameras maintained their silent watch. Environmental sensors monitored every change in water quality, and the community's shared determination to protect this space remained strong. Looking out over the transformed landscape, I realized Victoria's attack had failed in every way. Instead of destroying the pond, she had sparked its evolution into something more robust and significant. Instead of isolating me, she had united the community. Her final act of revenge had become a catalyst for positive change, reaching far beyond our neighborhood. The stars reflected on the pond's surface, their light dancing on water now protected by the most advanced environmental security systems available. Victoria had tried to poison this sanctuary, but in doing so, she had helped create something even more beautiful, a testament to resilience, community strength, and the power of standing together against corruption. 1 year later, the morning sun sparkled on the pond's surface as children gathered for the first annual Environmental Education Day. The transformation was complete, but its impact continued to ripple outward in unexpected ways. What began as one person's attempt to destroy had evolved into a cornerstone of community education and environmental protection. Students from local schools clustered around learning stations, their excited voices carrying across the water as they conducted water quality tests using simplified versions of our monitoring equipment. Lucy led a group through the native plant garden that now surrounded the pond, explaining how each species contributed to the ecosystem's health and resilience. Jack had turned one section of the property into an engineering showcase, demonstrating the sophisticated systems that protected the water. Children's eyes widened as he explained how sensors could detect the smallest changes in water chemistry, their tablets displaying real-time data from the pond's monitoring network. The transformation extended far beyond my backyard. Margaret Chen now used our case as a training example for HOA oversight committees across the state. The Nathan Protocol had been adopted by numerous communities, its environmental protection standards becoming a model for residential water feature management. Timothy Reed's satellite imaging company had developed new monitoring systems based on our experience, helping other communities detect and prevent environmental sabotage. The technology that documented our restoration now protected countless other properties from similar attacks. Oliver's security innovations had evolved into a comprehensive neighborhood watch program, combining traditional surveillance with environmental monitoring. The system had already prevented several attempted vandalism incidents in other communities, its success drawing attention from security experts nationwide. Robert Marshall, leading the reformed HOA board, had implemented transparency measures that transformed how the community governed itself. Monthly meetings now focused on genuine improvements rather than control and intimidation. Property values had risen naturally, driven by the neighborhood's reputation for environmental stewardship and community cooperation. Patricia had found her voice as an advocate for HOA reform, traveling to other communities to share her experiences and help implement protective measures. Her testimony in Victoria's trial had inspired others to come forward, exposing similar schemes across the country. The legal aftermath of Victoria's crimes continued to unfold. Her network of environmental extortion had been fully exposed, leading to investigations in multiple states. The evidence trail revealed dozens of properties targeted through her methods of contamination and coercion. Restitution funds were helping other communities restore damaged environments and implement protective measures. Rebecca from City Planning brought news that our restoration project had influenced building codes beyond just water features. New construction now required enhanced environmental protections and monitoring systems, creating safer, more sustainable communities. The ripple effects of our experience were reshaping urban development practices. Around midday, a special ceremony gathered the community by the pond's edge. The newly installed educational pavilion, funded by recovered funds from Victoria's seized assets, was being dedicated. Its walls displayed the story of destruction and renewal, teaching future generations about environmental protection and community resilience. Lucy's Garden Club had expanded into a full environmental education program, partnering with local schools to teach children about ecosystem management and environmental responsibility. The pond served as a living laboratory, demonstrating both the fragility and resilience of natural systems. The afternoon brought a surprise visit from state environmental officials. They were studying our restoration as a model for rapid response to environmental attacks. The protocols developed during our crisis were being incorporated into state emergency response guidelines, ensuring other communities would be better prepared to handle similar incidents. As evening approached, residents gathered for a community celebration. Tables lined the pond's edge, laden with food and memories. Children played safely in designated areas while their parents shared stories of the past year's transformation. The atmosphere was festive, but carried an undertone of vigilant determination. Never again would they allow their environment to be threatened. News arrived from the prosecutor's office. Victoria's appeals had been denied. Her conviction was final, her punishment secured. More importantly, her methods had been exposed, documented, and countered. Future attempts at environmental extortion would face enhanced detection and prevention measures developed from our experience. The sunset painted the water in brilliant colors as families settled in for an outdoor movie presentation. The documentary, created by local film students, chronicled our community's journey from crisis to transformation. It served as both historical record and educational tool, ensuring the lessons learned would benefit others. Looking out over the gathered community, I reflected on how Victoria's attempt to destroy something beautiful had instead created something extraordinary. The pond was more than restored. It had evolved into a symbol of resilience and a catalyst for positive change. Its waters now carried stories of determination, innovation, and the power of united community action. Jack's engineering students had developed new environmental protection systems based on our experience. Their innovations were being implemented in water features across the country, creating a network of protected environments resistant to sabotage and contamination. As stars began to appear in the darkening sky, their light reflecting off the pond's surface, the lasting impact of our struggle became clear. Victoria had tried to poison a single pond, but had instead sparked a movement for environmental protection and community empowerment. Her act of destruction had created a legacy of preservation and education that would benefit generations to come. The evening ended with a simple ceremony. Residents released floating candles onto the pond's surface, each light representing a commitment to protect and preserve their shared environment. The water that once carried poison now bore hope, its protected surface reflecting countless points of light reaching toward the future. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.